Did you ever wonder where Humpty Dumpty came from? The meanings behind three blind mice, pop goes the weasel, and other nursery rhymes. This take me back to my childhood here. Or the meaning of the song, Oh Susanna. All of these have a history that has changed considerably over time. Gary Sudin, I should have asked you the correct pronunciation. He's going to be chatting with us this morning about the meanings behind some of your favorite childhood songs and rhymes. He's going to, I'm sure, share more about himself, but he's lectured around the world on emerging technologies for 15 years and has run a computer networking company for 46 years. His vocation and hobbies include photography, travel, old cars, I love that, music, guitars, recording, humor, acoustics, technology, and his family. He takes all these hobbies to extremes. He's played guitar and been on stage throughout the world with the likes of Tommy Emmanuel, Muriel Anderson, and Martin Simpson. Let's welcome Gary Sudin. Thank you.
And that concludes our program. When I was a child, I was always curious, and the curiosity extended to the things that I simply didn't understand. Sun's so hot I froze to death? Ring around the rosy? What are these things talking about? It makes no sense to me. So I wanted to find out what these things were. Now, most of you probably know that Ring Around the Rosie is really about the plague, and that there were red circular marks on the bodies. And so ashes, all fall down. Yeah, so that's, for example, that's one of the things I discovered, and it wasn't pleasant. And I began to find out that a lot of these nursery rhymes also were a function of people being illiterate. Because 600-700 years ago, people were not literate. Oh, they could speak and understand each other, but they couldn't write or read necessarily. And there was a monarch, a king probably, that was running the country. And so is that king or queen polite? And so the problem becomes, how do you tell someone else if these people are good or bad? Because if you say something nasty about the monarch, you're liable to be killed. So you need to be very careful about how that's done. So one of the ways that was done was through nursery rhymes. So children could easily sing out things like, Mary, Mary, quite contrary, and not be beheaded at the time for calling the queen something pretty nasty. So these nursery rhymes are usually associated or reflect actual events in history. And a lot of these have just become common. And so people don't recognize what really the meanings were behind these. So as I say, the humble rhyme was used seemingly innocent vehicle to quickly spread subversive messages. So you could do that with children. And of course that allows an element of free speech as well. So usually there was a rhyming couplet and short and easy to remember so that children could do it. And it was a way to comment on the events of the day. So as I say here, direct criticism or dissent would often have been punishable by death. So I'm going to start with Humpty Dumpty because I always wondered about Humpty Dumpty. First of all, how would horses put together an egg? All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. So how did the horses participate in that? I mean, I'm a child, I'm 4 or 5 years old, and wondering how this could possibly be the case. So it turns out that Humpty was never an egg, and the horses, of course, were just an idea of might of the king. Well, the reality is that Humpty was a cannon on top of a church. And so this was a cannon used by the Royalist forces during the English Civil War of 1642 to 1651. And so here's the king holed up in this church with the cannon on top of the church, and he is defending himself. And this went on for 11 weeks with the cannon on top of the church, being able to defend the king as all the probably reasonable people are trying to take over the kingdom and do away with this king. So eventually they used their own cannon to knock the king's cannon off the top of the church and into the marshland below. And then all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. So that's the reality of it. Now I want to know how this would be 400 years ago, how they possibly got a cannon on top of a church. Did they use block and tackle? Did they use pulleys? How did they do it? In any case, it must have been a steep pull. Thank you, thank you. They'll get worse, I assure you. So, Humpty Dumpty was never an egg, and it wasn't an egg until the illustrator for Alice in Wonderland, for Lewis Carroll, decided that it should be an egg sitting on a wall. And so that's how that became known as an egg, and everyone assumes it's an egg today. But it never was an egg, it was always a cannon. And when I discovered that, it was just, wow, how could a Humpty Dumpty possibly be an egg? That's just... So other nursery rhymes like Pop Goes the Weasel. So this is interesting because there were two interpretations that I found of this. One was that there were sweatshops in England, and they're popping. The weasel was the spinner's weasel was a mechanical thread measuring device in the shape of a spoked wheel that accurately measured out yarn by making a popping sound to indicate the correct length. And so they would pop that weasel over and over, and it was beyond monotonous. So one version of this interpretation is that it was the pop of this weasel that went by that they would start singing to the rhythm of them sewing. And then the other version of this was from slang. And the slang was that you would need your good clothes to wear for Sunday, but then you couldn't afford to keep them for the rest of the week, so you would pawn them for the week and then pick them up on Saturday and then wear them on Sunday. And so to pop is a slang word for pawn, and weasel is derived from weasel and stoat, meaning coat. And so it was traditional for even poor people to own a suit, which they wore as their Sunday best. As times were hard, they would pawn their suit or coat on Monday and claim it back before Sunday, hence the term, Pop Goes the Weasel. Three Blind Mice. So many of these nursery rhymes they're just terrible. They have meanings that were really, really horrific, and this is a great example of that. The three blind mice were three noblemen who adhered to the Protestant faith, where most of the people around them were Catholic. So as you know, there was some animosity between the Catholics and the Protestants. And so the farmer's wife refers to the daughter of King Henry VIII, Queen Mary I, and Mary was a staunch Catholic, and her violent persecution of Protestants led to her nickname of Bloody Mary. So these three noblemen who adhered to the Protestant faith were convicted of plotting against the Queen. And so she didn't have them dismembered and blinded, as in Three Blind Mice, but she did have them burnt at the stake. So there's another nursery rhyme with Bloody Mary, and that's Mary, Mary, quite contrary. And silver bells and cockle shells were torture devices. So here's more nursery rhymes. Georgie Porgy. So most historians think that Georgie Porgy was about Prince Regent George IV of Britain, and he was of very, very hefty weight and size, and he had a reputation for lusting after food and women. hence his references to pudding pie and making the girls cry. Baa Baa Black Sheep, 1272. So these go back a long, long way. Crusaders returned to England from the Holy Land. Along the way, they racked up quite a bill. So King Edward I imposed new taxes on Britain's wool industry to rake in extra revenue. These tax requirements were immortalized in Baa Baa Black Sheep's allotment of bags and wool to various parties, including the master. Jack and Jill. So there's a couple of different interpretations of this one, but everyone knows the story of Jack and Jill up the hill, supposedly to get a pail of water. Turns out that they think that they were really having an illegal romantic tryst up at the top of the hill. And so, well, historians say the story commemorates a love affair between an unmarried couple who regularly meet on the hill for romantic trysts. Jill becomes pregnant, but Jack died before the birth of their child, broke his crown, and then Jill died in childbirth, tumbling after her lover. So aren't these all wonderful? I mean, I was thinking of things like Mary had a little lamb, and wondering what the truth was behind that. And the truth is, she just had a little lamb, and it followed her to school. So, and then I was thinking about old MacDonald had a farm, and he really did have a farm. All right, so we're gonna take a look at some common folk songs now. And so one of them is Paul McCartney's Blackbird. And so I was curious about this. When I first heard it, this was about 1965. And this was during the revolution in the United States of equality. And so a bird in English parlance, of course, is a woman. And so could this be that this is really about a black bird in the United States? So I have actually found a video of Paul McCartney explaining it.
Originally, I had in mind a black woman during the civil rights time, when people were being excluded back of the bus. People couldn't go in hotels. Black people in America particularly couldn't go in South Africa. Didn't have access to the places that white people had. So for me, it was there was a civil rights aspect, and I used the black bird as a kind of symbol of a black woman in the South. And you were only waiting for this moment to arise, you're finally getting your rights. So it's kind of symbolic of that. So that's another reason I like it, and I'm proud of it. You are only waiting for this moment to be free.
This one. Singing in the dead of night. Take these broken wings and learn to fly. All your life, you were only waiting for this moment to rise. Blackbirds singing in the dead of night. Take these sunken eyes and learn to see. All your life, you were only waiting for this moment to be free. Blackbird fly, blackbird fly, in the light of a dark black night. Doesn't matter how long you practice it, it still doesn't come out right. All right, this one, yes. There we go. Okay, so on the Sgt. Pepper's album, the Beatles had a song called A Day in the Life, and this was all about the death of the Guinness heir, Tara Brown. And it's a lavish song with 41-piece orchestra, and they're all dressed in formal wear, and there were two songs, one actually written by John Lennon, one by Paul McCartney, that put it together, and then all scored by Sir George Martin. And the song's narrative is about Tara Brown, the Guinness heir who died in a car crash. Brown was the son of the 4th Lord Oranmore and Brown and Ona Guinness, and was friend of many rock stars at the time, including the Rolling Stones, and was suggested that he died while under the influence of LSD. So Lennon had read a coroner's report about this and was prompted to write, "He blew his mind out in a car. He didn't notice that the lights had changed." And although the song contains many haunting and compelling images, perhaps the most enduring was gleaned from another newspaper report, this time in the condition of highway repairs in the northern town. And this inspired Lennon to muse on 4,000 holes in Blackburn, Lancashire, and how many holes it would take to fill the Albert Hall. So here's another, this is another Lennon one, was they were friends with Peter Fonda, and she said on the 1966 Revolver album, was the real thing. It was inspired by John Lennon's second acid trip, which he did with Peter Fonda and George Harrison. The actor reassured Harrison when he started having a bad trip, saying, "I know what it's like to be dead," a reference to a shooting accident when Fonda was 10. The BBC banned Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, thinking that it was about LSD, the initials of the Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. Not so, said Lennon, who insisted the source was a fantasy of a drawing by his son Julian of a nursery classmate, Lucy O'Donnell. Also, talking about things like drugs like this, that the Puff the Magic Dragon was, people always accused Peter Yarrow that was a drug song, and he's said over and over and over that it never was about. It was about a boy and a dragon and his fantasies. And I had the privilege of meeting him, and he couldn't have been nicer. He's just a wonderful, wonderful person. So here's a really, really interesting song. When I was a child, I always wondered, what are they talking about? Sun so hot I froze to death? What are you talking about? What is this about? What is this? This makes no sense at all. And so I finally found the all original verses of this song, and there are 4 verses. The second verse is quite racist, and it's really about a man. During the Civil War, he's been separated from his Susanna, and somehow, and he's in Alabama, and he's trying to make light of the idea that he's in Alabama with a banjo on his knee, because banjos are always fun. And he really, really wants to get to New Orleans and find the love of his life. Somehow he finds out that that's where she is. And so written, of course, by Stephen Foster, the father of American music. And an interesting aside is that a local music store, Peters and Field, bought this song for $100, but before they could publish it, it was pirated by a New York publisher who printed it with the name of E.P. Christie as the author. Now, some of you may remember the group Christie's Minstrels. So they were a folk group back in the late 50s, early 60s. And so they sang this song and it became a hit. And so Christie's Minstrel were rapidly becoming the most popular group in the Bowery Theater District of Manhattan, and were the chief performers of Foster's minstrel songs in the 1850s. So from my perspective, this song is all about a man who is so consumed with the idea of finding his Susanna that he doesn't know if it's hot or cold, if it's raining or it's dry. And that's, to me, what this song is all about. And so most people eliminated the violent second verse, and I'm going to sing with a few words changed. And so the traveler, returning from a long absence, likely from fighting in the Civil War, doing everything he can to drag himself home to his true love, knowing that even with all of his effort, he may never be able to see her again. And so the way I hear it, the banjos, the gaiety, the bravado, sun so hot I froze to death, Susanna, don't you cry, in order to convince himself that he's going to be able to find his love and things will be all right in the end. So Stephen Foster was 21 when he wrote Oh Susanna in 1847, and it was almost immediately a hit. It also became a theme song for the Gold Rush. I'm going to California with my wash pan on my knee. Well, I come from Alabama with a banjo on my knee. I'm going to Louisiana, my true love for to see. Rained all night the day I left, the weather it was dry. Sun so hot I froze to death, Susanna, don't you cry. Oh, Susanna, now don't you cry for me. Come from Alabama with a banjo on my knee. I jumped aboard the telegraph and traveled down the river. The electric fluid magnified, and who was killed, you figure. The engine burst, the horse run off, I really thought I'd die. I shut my mouth to hold my breath, Susanna, don't you cry. Oh, Susanna, now don't you cry for me. I come from Alabama with a banjo on my knee. I had a dream the other night when everything was still. I thought I saw Susanna, she was a-comin' down the hill. A buckwheat cake was in her mouth, a tear was in her eye. Says I'm coming from the south, Susanna, don't you cry. Don't, Susanna, now don't you cry for me. I come from Alabama with a banjo on my knee. I soon will be in New Orleans, and I'll look all around. And when I find Susanna, then I'll fall upon the ground. But if I do not find her, this boy will surely die. And when I'm dead and buried, Susanna, don't you cry. Oh, Susanna, now don't you cry for me. I come from Alabama with a banjo on my knee. Everybody. Oh, Susanna, now don't you cry for me. 'Cause I come from Alabama with a banjo on my So I also wondered about the song Waltzing Matilda, because there's words in there I did not understand, made no sense, and I really wanted to figure out what that was all about. And so once you learn the meaning of it, it's really quite interesting. And so for most people, the words of Waltzing Matilda embody the free spirit, resourcefulness, and defiance of authority associated with the Australian national character. The melody is memorable and spirited. Some scholars and folklorists argue that the song is a political statement in much the same way as classic children's nursery rhymes attacked political figures in earlier centuries. The song is not an explicit attack on the squatters' refusal to pay shearers higher wages. However, some researchers believe that Waltzing Matilda was based on the conflict that raged between these two groups in the 1890s before the song was composed. So here's some of the definitions of the words that are going to be in this song. Waltzing Matilda is the act of carrying a swag, which is a backpack. And so Matilda is an old Teutonic female name meaning mighty battle maid. This is the wife that accompanied a wanderer. In the Australian bush, a man's swag was regarded as his sleeping partner. In the Australian bush, a man's swag, then billabong is a small oxbow water hole on the outside channel of a river. And so if you look at the original Aboriginal meaning for this, billa is water and bong is dead. So it's just a pool of water there. And coolabah is a tree, is a species of gum or eucalyptus tree. Swagman is an Australian itinerant worker, so called on account of the swag, usually a chaff bag, containing the billy, provisions and blankets. And the billy is an open-topped can. And so he would make his tea by putting water in the billy and putting it on the fire to get hot so he could make himself some tea. Oftentimes it had a wire carrying handle. Tucker bag is the bag for his food. You'll see that used here. And a jumbuck is a sheep. And so, when doing research for this, I found that it may be a corruption of the words for jump up, a jumbuck. And a squatter is not the term that we use today. The squatter was actually the owner of the land. And so the squatter was the ranch owner. And note that the meaning of this word changed in the 20th century to mean a person that occupied or resided at a property illegal. That's not the case here. The constabulary ended up working with them to maintain law and order. You'll see that used in the song as the word troopers. And to all non-landowners, squatters were an object of resentment. And of course, to steal a jumbuck or a sheep was punishable by death. Banjo Patterson has been considered the creator of the lyrics of Waltzing Matilda, and some commentators believed he adapted the words from an existing bush ballad. However, researchers now agree that Banjo wrote original lyrics in 1895, a new bush song, while staying with the McPherson family on their property, Dagworth Station, approximately 100 kilometers northwest of the town of Winton in Queensland. The origins of the medley are more complex and have been subject to much debate. The existence of an original musical manuscript by Christina McPherson came to public notice in 1971, along with an undated letter by Christina to Thomas Wood recalling the events surrounding the creation of the song. This led to Christina being accredited as the first creator of the music. Two versions of this manuscript are now held in the National Library of Australia. Yet, as Christina openly acknowledged, she adapted the tune from an existing folk song, which she had heard played as a march by an existing brass band. Some say it comes from a Scottish ballad. The Christina McPherson and Banjo Patterson version was performed frequently after its composition, and was absorbed into oral tradition, meaning that as more people learned the song by ear, Patterson and McPherson were less frequently linked to the song. This is perhaps why Waltzing Matilda is often referred to as a folk song, Thou Bonny Wood of Craigilia. The song narrates the story of an itinerant worker making a crude cup of tea at a bush camp and capturing a sheep to eat. When the sheep's ostensible owner arrives with 3 policemen to arrest the worker, he drowns himself in the small lake and goes on to haunt the site. So here's the original manuscript in words, but I'll give you the real words. Once a jolly swagman camped by a billabong under the shade of a coolabah tree, and he sang as he watched, and he waited till his billy boiled. You'll come a waltzing Matilda with me, waltzing Matilda, waltzing Matilda, you'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. And he sang as he watched, and he waited till his belly boiled. You'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. Down came a jumbuck to drink at that billabong. Up jumped the swagman and grabbed him with glee. And And he sang as he stowed that jumbuck in his tucker bag. You'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. Waltzing Matilda, waltzing Matilda, you'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. And he sang as he stowed that jumbuck in his tucker bag. You'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. Up rode the squatter, mounted on his thoroughbred. Down come the troopers, 1, 2, 3. Where's that jolly jumbuck you've got in your tucker bag? You'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. Waltzing Matilda, waltzing Matilda, you'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. Where's that jolly jumbuck you've got in your tucker bag? You'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. Up jumped the swagman and sprang into the billabong. You'll never take me alive, said he, and his ghost may be heard as you pass by that billabong. You'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. Waltzing Matilda, waltzing Matilda, you'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. And his ghost may be heard as you pass by that billabong. You'll come a waltzing Matilda with me, everyone. Waltzing Matilda, waltzing Matilda, you'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. And his ghost may be heard as you pass by that billabong. You'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. And that's it. That's my presentation. Went a little bit faster than I thought it might. So certainly open to questions.
Okay, I'll start off.
Yes, sir. Back there.
Sorry. Why did some of these nursery rhymes stay around so long?
Really?
The last words were?
Why did some of the nursery rhymes, especially the ones that are kind of disturbing, why have they been carried along so long?
Because they're fun. I mean, here, you can just see the children in the circles, ring around the rosy. I mean, you can just see that happening, but they don't know the meaning of it. And that's one of the reasons I've made this presentation, is because you look through other nursery rhymes, they are really, really disturbing. I almost made a list of about 24 of them that were more and more and more disturbing. I mean, just the very idea that 3 blind mice was about killing 3 Catholic priests. I mean, on and on and on. Most of these were just about communicating this bit of information with people that wouldn't be killed by someone if you say, oh yeah, that Queen Mary, she's not a good person. Yes, ma'am.
I kind of vaguely remember the waltzing Matilda was almost like hit parade for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, was there a particular group that?
I want to say it was the Christy Minstrels that sang.
Could be.
Yeah. There were so many folk groups that back in the early 1960s, and they sang folk songs. And so I concentrated on more, I mean, you know, This Land is Your Land, okay, everybody knows what that's about. But some of these songs like the Beatles, when a lot of people write songs, they take it from their own ideas. And I mean, I've written songs about pretty much everything from love songs to spousal abuse and places where I lived and everything in between. So, and also fun songs too. But yes.
I wonder what they'll think about blue suede shoes in 2080 or something.
I was just going to ask, do you give performances at local libraries as a storyteller?
I could do that.
I mean, that'd be fascinating to read a book and tell the little kids what it really means.
Well,
You'd only do it once.
I really don't want to depress children, you know, at the age of 3 or 4. I don't think that's a good idea to get them completely depressed about what humanity really is like.
But it's fascinating. It's very interesting.
Probably not appropriate.
Yeah.
You know, this is so in line with when my kids were little, especially this one, like loved Grimm's fairy tales.
Oh, right.
And they're just horrific. Like, they're horrific. I'd be like,
Yeah.
okay, we'll read it.
Yeah. I mean, imagine putting a kid in an oven.
Right. Right. Eating children.
What's with these people? Well, that's the reason they're called Grimm fairy tales.
No. But yes, they are.
Yes, ma'am.
Do the Grimm fairy tales have the same type of
Yes.
background as these
Yeah,
do?
yeah. Yeah, so many, and it's surprising to me how many of these stories were negative stories and not positive affirmations in some way. But I guess that's life.
Headlines.
Yeah, yeah, headlines.
Have you, don't need this, sorry, it was habit. Have you found, as people learn these, that they're restricting their children from singing them now that they know the meaning?
No, I wouldn't say that. I don't think that. It's part of education. And to me, this was part of my education, to find out what these things were about. Sons of hot, froze to death? Come on, that doesn't make any sense at all. But it's a person who's so emotional, he has no idea what the weather is at all. And he's got to get to his Susanna. And that most people can understand.
I mean, Bob, this totally ties into it's my husband Bob sitting in front of me. When he studied the Kodai method of music education, it was, you can speak to it much more cogently than I can, but it was all about the importance of understanding your folk music when you're learning music.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So many of these songs that I learned as folk songs. Well, Charlie on the MTA, I'm sure that most of you remember that from the Kingston Trio. And that was a hit song. And it was a protest song about the Metropolitan Transit Authority in New York raising their price from a nickel to get on the train to a dime. And that, I mean, I used to sing that all the time in the early 1960s as a protest song. But it was a hit song. So there's one part of that where he's stuck on the train because Charlie doesn't have a dime to get off the train.
Yeah.
And so there was a verse in there that I always liked to change because his wife would hand him a sandwich through the train window as it went passing by, was one of the verses. And I always wondered why she didn't hand him a dime. So I liked to change the words for that. But so many of these early folk songs were that. I mean, here's Woody Guthrie describing this land is your land. Look at the United States and how amazing. I mean, if you've traveled at all and gone through the national parks, they're astounding, they're wonderful, they're spectacular. All right. Yes, ma'am.
Are you aware of any like current groups today that are doing like folk songs kind of like this?
Ooh, I would say that there's a lot of songs that are out there that describe things that are going on now in the world. You look at some of the common. I was listening to a song the other day that was written by an Australian group. I love finding all these odd things, and it was Toro Never Made It to Darwin. And it's a rock song, and I'm thinking, okay, who's Toro and what's this song about? And then it's got the name Tracy in there. Well, Tracy made it to Darwin, but Toro never made it to Darwin. And it turns out this song is about, I can't recall the date, but 20 or 30 years ago, that there was a hurricane, a violent storm, that came and decimated Darwin, Australia. But Toro was the Japanese commander who was in charge of trying to take over Australia, and he never made it to Darwin.
Oh, wow.
But the hurricane did and devastated Darwin.
Jeez.
So yeah, there's lots of this in common, and like I say, I've written songs where it was about common events, things that I observed that I didn't necessarily appreciate, or some that I really did appreciate, or some that were completely made up. It's just, I wrote a song called Room with a View that is, my room at the time was overlooking the Boone County Hospital parking lot. But it sounds, in the song, it sounds like I'm looking over the city of New York.
It's interesting to me, the songs that talk about the Catholicism and the history of violence and whatnot, because I'd have to say that most of those I learned while in Catholic school.
Mhm.
And so it's interesting to think about that.
Mhm. Yeah, I songs and poetry are such a wonderful way of writing history. We all know that history is written by the victors. And so it's a wonderful way of saying, no, Mary was quite contrary and wasn't a nice person. It's a great way of actually showing history as it really was. Yes, ma'am.
This came to me, I can't think of the guy's name, but it was like Dr. Foster went to Gloucester, all in something of rain. He stepped in a puddle up to his middle and never went there again. There's got to be something to that, and I got stuck on that for several years, obsessing about how deep would that puddle be, you know, just,
It sounds like it was about a flood.
yeah.
And isn't it amazing that, I mean, think about it, 30 years ago, doing research like this would have been very, very difficult to do. And now we have more information available to us in our pocket than we'd ever want to know. And of course, so much of the information is apocryphal. Not only, of course, is the history rewritten by the victors, but 90% of all statistics are made up on the spot. Anything else? Would you like to hear me play something else?
Yeah, we would love
Okay.
it.
All of this triggered something in my mind, Gary, and I've heard this song on the radio. There's a group in Australia called Midnight Oil, and they did a song called Beds Are Burnt.
Yes.
And I always wondered what that pertained to. I just looked
So
it up.
what that's all about, I can tell you, it's a band called Midnight Oil, and they wrote a song all about, let's give the land back to the Aborigines because this was their land. And that's what the song's all about. And it was a hit song in the 80s. And so, yeah, that's what that was all about. Well, let's see, if I'm going to play something, why don't I play you a Beatles song? I like to take songs and make them my own if I can. I kind of destroyed Blackbird a little bit ago. What can I say? I've been busy. But this, I was so fortunate, and you can look at this up on YouTube, that I was on stage with Tommy Emmanuel, who's one of the world-renowned fingerstyle guitarists. And I was so fortunate to be able to be on stage with him. And because he had written some of the words to this song on his guitar, I decided to perform this for him. Try to see it my way. Do I have to keep on talking till I can't go on? See it your way. Risk of knowing that our love may soon be gone. We can work it out. We can work it out. Think of what you're saying. You can get it wrong and yet you think that it's all right. Think of what I'm saying. Get it right, get it straight, to say good night. We can work it out, we can work it out. Life is very short, there's no time for futzing and fighting, my friend. I can't please stop, it's a crime. So I will ask you once again. Try to see it my way. Only time will tell if I am right or I'm wrong. See it your way. Risk of knowing that our love may soon be gone. We can work it out. We can work it out. Life is very short. There's no time for fussing and fighting, my friend. I have always thought it's a crime, so I will ask you once again. Thank you. Now, did you get the idea that this was a clock? Thank you so very much for coming. I enjoyed being here. Be well. Drive safely home.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Thank you.
Hello.